Sarah Thornton, a 32-year-old widow with 3 children, stood in her yard with a shovel, digging trenches that would make her the laughingstock of the entire settlement. She'd been at it for 3 days straight, carving serpentine patterns through the prairie soil behind her modest cabin. Her neighbors watched with a mixture of pity and contempt as this woman, already struggling to make ends meet after her husband's death in a logging accident the previous winter, wasted precious time and energy burying iron pipes 6 feet underground. What possible purpose could this serve? She had crops to tend, children to feed, and winter approaching fast. Yet here she was, connecting dozens of feet of salvaged pipe in elaborate loops beneath the frozen earth, as if the ground itself could somehow warm her family through the brutal Montana winter ahead. Thomas Garrett, the settlement's most experienced homesteader, stopped by on September 17th. He'd survived 14 Montana winters and built 7 cabins that still stood strong. "Sarah," he said, shaking his head as he watched her lower another section of pipe into the trench, "I've seen desperate folks do foolish things, but this takes the prize. You're burying good iron that could be used for a dozen practical purposes. That pipe could fix your roof, reinforce your door, make tools. Instead, you're putting it where it'll do nothing but rust." Sarah didn't argue. She just kept working, her hands blistered and bleeding, her children helping to backfill the trenches as she moved forward with her incomprehensible plan. Elizabeth Crawford, who ran the settlement's general store and had seen countless families come and go, was even more blunt. On September 22nd, she cornered Sarah at the well. "Mrs. Thornton," she said, loud enough for others to hear, "I understand you're grieving, but this madness has to stop. You've got 3 mouths to feed and winter coming. Every hour you spend digging holes is an hour you're not preserving food or cutting firewood. Your children will freeze because their mother lost her senses." The women drawing water nodded in agreement. It was harsh, but it seemed true. Sarah's behavior defied all frontier logic. Fuel meant survival. Food meant survival. Buried pipes meant nothing. Reverend John Patterson, who'd ministered to the settlement for 8 years and considered himself a man of both faith and reason, visited Sarah's homestead on September 28th. He found her assembling what looked like a large wooden box with copper coils inside, connected to the buried pipes. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know the loss of Jacob has been devastating. But this contraption, these buried pipes, this isn't the answer. God gave us wood to burn and walls to build. He didn't intend for us to dig up the earth chasing some impossible dream of warmth from below. I'm worried about you, and I'm worried about your children. This path you're on, it's not sound." Sarah looked up from her work, dirt smudging her face, and said simply, "Reverend, I appreciate your concern, but I know what I'm doing." He left convinced she didn't. What did Sarah Thornton understand that these experienced, well-meaning settlers had completely missed? Before we reveal the scientific principle that would vindicate her and revolutionize heating in the American West, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. This story gets wild. By early October, Sarah's project had consumed nearly a month of labor. She'd buried 400 feet of iron pipe in a complex grid pattern 6 feet below the surface of her property. The pipes ran in parallel lines, each separated by exactly 3 feet, covering an area 30 feet by 40 feet. Every pipe connected to a central manifold that led into her cabin. Inside, she'd constructed a heat exchange box measuring 4 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet, packed with copper coiling that connected to the buried pipes. A hand pump sat atop this box, and the entire contraption connected to a network of smaller pipes running beneath her cabin floor. The specifications seemed insane to everyone who saw them. Thomas Garrett examined the setup on October 8th and couldn't make sense of it. "You've got pipes running through cold ground," he said, "connected to more pipes under a cold floor, all powered by a hand pump that'll wear you out just operating it. Sarah, heat rises from fire. You know this. Every person here knows this. We burn wood in stoves and fireplaces because combustion creates heat. You're trying to pull heat from frozen earth. It's like trying to draw water from an empty well." He wasn't being cruel. He was genuinely baffled by the fundamental misunderstanding of thermodynamics he thought he was witnessing. Samuel Bridger, a mining engineer who'd worked in Colorado and Nevada before settling in Montana, stopped by on October 15th. He had actual technical education, which made his assessment particularly damning. "Mrs. Thornton," he said, studying her system with professional interest, "I understand the theory you're attempting. You think the Earth below frost line maintains a constant temperature, and you're trying to extract that heat. But the thermal conductivity of soil is abysmal. You'd need massive surface area and significant temperature differential to transfer meaningful heat. Your 400 feet of pipe simply isn't sufficient. Furthermore, the energy required to pump fluid through this system will exceed any heat gain. Thermodynamically, you're operating at a loss before you even factor in the initial construction cost." He pulled out a pencil and paper, showing her calculations that proved her system couldn't work. The math seemed irrefutable. Margaret Hayes, who'd grown up in Minnesota and survived winters that killed livestock and frostbit men, offered her own critique on October 22nd. "Sarah, honey, I've seen temperatures drop to 40 below. I've seen wind that cuts through 3 layers of wool like they're not even there. The only thing that kept my family alive back in Minnesota was a roaring fire and thick walls. You've got thin walls and buried pipes. When it gets cold, really cold, you're going to realize how badly you've miscalculated. Please, it's not too late. Spend the next few weeks cutting cordwood instead of tinkering with that pump. Stock up fuel like the rest of us. This experiment, it's going to cost your children dearly." Sarah kept working. On October 29th, she sealed the last connections and filled the system with water mixed with salt to prevent freezing. She'd calculated that she needed 18% salt concentration to keep the fluid liquid down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. The total system held 47 gallons. Every morning and evening she'd pump the hand lever 200 times, circulating the fluid through the buried pipes and back through the heat exchange box in her cabin. Her children helped, taking turns at the pump. To observers, it looked like back-breaking labor for zero return. They couldn't see what was happening underground. What Sarah understood, and what her critics had never considered, was thermal mass and ground source heat transfer. The Earth below the frost line, roughly 6 feet deep in Montana, maintains a relatively constant temperature year-round. While surface temperatures might swing from 90 degrees in summer to 40 below in winter, the soil at 6 feet stays between 45 and 55 degrees Fahrenheit throughout the year. This wasn't speculation. Sarah had measured it herself the previous spring, driving a steel rod deep into the ground and taking temperature readings at various depths. She discovered that at 6 feet, the Earth held steady at 48 degrees even when surface snow was 2 feet deep, and air temperature was 10 below zero. The principle wasn't new. Korean ondel heating systems had used heated floors for centuries, circulating heat from cooking fires beneath stone floors that radiated warmth long after the flames died. Plains Indians had understood that earth-sheltered dwellings stayed warmer in winter and cooler in summer, building lodges partially underground where the Earth's insulation protected against temperature extremes. European peasants had known that root cellars stayed cool in summer and frost-free in winter by tapping into the Earth's stable temperature. What Sarah had engineered was a heat extraction and distribution system that leveraged the Earth's thermal mass in ways these traditional approaches had understood intuitively but never mechanized. Her 400 feet of buried iron pipe had a total surface area of approximately 210 square feet, counting both inside and outside pipe surfaces. At 6 feet deep, this pipe was in constant contact with soil maintaining 48 degrees. The salt water circulating through the pipes absorbed heat from this soil through thermal conduction. Here's where the physics got interesting. Iron conducts heat at approximately 50 BTUs per hour per square foot per degree Fahrenheit temperature difference. Sarah's pipes, surrounded by 48-degree soil and filled with 32-degree salt water initially, had a 16-degree differential. Over 400 feet of pipe with 210 square feet of surface area that translated to roughly 168,000 BTUs transferred per hour during active circulation. To put that in perspective, a typical wood stove puts out 30 to 50,000 BTUs per hour, but only while actively burning fuel that must be constantly replenished. The heat exchange box in Sarah's cabin was equally clever. The copper coiling inside had even better thermal conductivity than iron, about 220 BTUs per hour per square foot per degree. As the warmed salt water passed through these copper coils, heat radiated into the surrounding air. She'd positioned the box low in the cabin because, contrary to common wisdom about heat rising, she wanted to warm the floor first. Radiant floor heating creates an even temperature distribution that eliminates cold spots and drafts. The smaller distribution pipes running beneath her floorboards spread this heat across the entire living space. Critics like Samuel Bridger were partially right about one thing: pumping did require energy. Sarah's hand pump demanded significant effort. But the energy equation wasn't as simple as Bridger calculated. His analysis assumed the system needed to heat water from freezing to room temperature, which would indeed require massive energy input. But Sarah wasn't heating water. She was extracting existing heat from a source that never depleted. The 48-degree Earth was essentially a limitless battery, recharged by geothermal gradient and insulated by the soil layers above it. Every stroke of Sarah's pump simply moved that stored heat from underground into her living space. The construction process had required precision. Sarah had laid each pipe section in trenches excavated to exactly 6 feet. The depth she'd determined was below Montana's frost line. She'd connected the pipes using threaded couplings sealed with oakum and tar to prevent leaks. The parallel pipe layout ensured maximum soil contact area while maintaining efficient flow patterns. Where the pipes entered her cabin through the foundation, she'd wrapped them in insulated cloth to prevent heat loss during the transition from underground to interior space. Every detail reflected careful planning based on principles her critics didn't understand, because they'd never questioned how heat could be moved rather than created. The parallel ancestral knowledge was striking. In New Mexico, Pueblo peoples had built homes with southern exposure and thermal mass walls that absorbed daytime heat and released it at night. In Scandinavia, immigrants to America remembered homes built partially underground, using Earth's insulating properties. Japanese farmhouses used irori, sunken hearths, where rising heat was captured in ceiling areas before being redistributed. Sarah hadn't invented the concept of using Earth's thermal properties. She'd engineered a mechanical system to actively extract and distribute that heat, something no one in Montana territory had attempted before. By November 10th, Sarah's system was fully operational. She pumped morning and evening, circulating the salt water through her underground network. The floor of her cabin began to feel noticeably warmer than the frigid planks in neighboring homes. Her wood stove ran at minimal capacity, just enough to take the edge off morning chill and heat cooking water. While other families were already burning through significant portions of their winter fuel supplies, Sarah had used less than 1/10 of a cord of wood. November in Montana territory brought the first serious cold. On November 18th, temperatures dropped to 14 degrees Fahrenheit. Thomas Garrett's cabin, built with traditional double-wall construction and a robust stone fireplace, required constant stoking to maintain 58 degrees inside. He burned through half a cord of wood in 4 days. Margaret Hayes, with her thick-walled Minnesota-style home and cast-iron stove, kept her family at 62 degrees but consumed nearly a full cord that week. Their fuel expenses were climbing, their labor was constant, and winter had barely begun. Meanwhile, Sarah pumped her system twice daily, 20 minutes of effort total, and her cabin held steady at 64 degrees with almost no wood consumption. Neighbors noticed, but they attributed it to luck or measurement error. The real test hadn't come yet. December arrived with warning signs. Cattle started gathering in tight groups. Wild animals moved to lower elevations. Old-timers who'd seen 40 Montana winters checked their supplies and worried. On December 8th, the barometric pressure dropped like a stone. By December 9th, the storm had arrived. This wasn't typical winter weather. This was a killing cold that would test every structure, every system, every assumption about survival on the northern plains. The blizzard hit with winds exceeding 50 miles per hour and temperatures that would plunge to 42 degrees below zero, sustained for 11 days straight. Montana had seen bad winters before. The winter of 1883-84 would be remembered as catastrophic. December 10th. The wind screamed across the prairie with such force that it tore shingles from roofs and collapsed poorly braced walls. Snow didn't fall so much as it flew horizontally, creating drifts that buried first-floor windows and trapped families inside their homes. Thomas Garrett's family burned wood frantically, stoking their fireplace every 2 hours through the night. By the third day of the storm, December 12th, despite consuming half a cord per day, their cabin interior had dropped to 43 degrees. Thomas's youngest son, 6-year-old William, developed a fever and a rattling cough. His lips took on a blue tinge. Thomas held the boy close to the fireplace, terrified he was watching his child succumb to pneumonia brought on by the relentless cold. Elizabeth Crawford's store became a refuge for families whose fuel supplies ran critically low. She opened her doors to 17 people on December 13th, rationing her own wood supply to keep the store's 2 stoves burning. Even with 2 fires going and 17 bodies creating heat, the interior temperature hovered at 39 degrees. People huddled in blankets, pressing close to the stoves in shifts. Elizabeth herself developed severe frostbite on 3 fingers when she had to venture outside to the woodpile. The flesh turned white, then mottled purple. She would lose part of her index finger before spring. Samuel Bridger's home, built with engineering precision and superior materials, fared better than most, but still suffered brutally. His thick walls and optimized fireplace design kept temperatures at 48 degrees, but only through wood consumption that would exhaust his supply in another week if the cold continued. His hands were raw from splitting and hauling logs. His lungs ached from breathing smoke that backed up when wind gusts overpowered his chimney draw. On December 14th, his wife Martha went into early labor, brought on by the stress and cold. The baby, a girl, arrived blue and silent. Samuel held his stillborn daughter and wondered if better heat might have saved her. Reverend Patterson's family struggled desperately. His cabin, adequate for normal Montana winters, couldn't cope with sustained 40-below temperatures. By December 15th, despite burning furniture to supplement his depleted wood supply, the interior temperature had fallen to 34 degrees. His elderly mother, visiting from Ohio, became disoriented and lethargic. Patterson recognized hypothermia setting in. In desperation, he bundled her in every blanket they owned and decided to risk the storm. He had to get her somewhere warmer, or she'd die within hours. Through whiteout conditions, barely able to see 10 feet ahead, he pulled her on a sled through waist-deep drifts. He wasn't sure where he was going. He just knew staying meant death. The sled runner caught on something. Patterson fell, exhausted. Then he heard it, the steady creak-creak of a hand pump working rhythmically. He looked up and saw, through the driving snow, Sarah Thornton's cabin. A faint glow came from the windows. He dragged his mother to the door and pounded weakly. Sarah opened it, and Patterson nearly collapsed. The warmth that rushed out wasn't the intense dry heat of an overstoked stove. It was gentle, even, enveloping. He pulled his mother inside and stared in disbelief. The cabin interior was 68 degrees Fahrenheit. 68 degrees. While the settlement froze and children died, this widow's home was warmer than most houses in summer. Sarah's 3 children sat at a table doing schoolwork in their shirt sleeves. No massive fire roared in her small stove, just a modest flame for cooking and comfort. Sarah herself worked her hand pump, 200 steady strokes, while her eldest daughter helped. "How?" Patterson managed to ask. Sarah gestured to her heat exchange box, warm to the touch. "The earth doesn't care about blizzards, Reverend. 6 feet down, it's still 48 degrees. I just bring that heat inside." She gave Patterson's mother hot tea and wrapped her in blankets. Within an hour, color returned to the old woman's face. Her confusion cleared. Patterson sat in Sarah's cabin and felt his entire understanding of frontier survival crumble. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button and comment below with your location. I want to know where you're watching from and if you've ever experienced cold like this. By December 16th, word had spread. Thomas Garrett appeared at Sarah's door, carrying William wrapped in blankets. The boy's fever had worsened. His breathing was shallow. "Please," Thomas said, pride shattered by desperation. Sarah took them in without hesitation. She set William near her heat exchange box and gave him warm broth. The steady, gentle heat worked on the boy like medicine. Within 3 hours, his breathing eased. By morning, his fever had broken. Thomas sat in Sarah's cabin at sunrise on December 17th, watching his son sleep peacefully, and did something he'd never done before. He admitted he'd been completely wrong. Margaret Hayes came next, on December 18th, with frostbitten feet that had gone numb in her frigid home. Samuel Bridger arrived on December 19th, seeking refuge not for himself, but for his wife, devastated by their daughter's death and needing somewhere warm to grieve safely. The settlement's doctor, Robert Chen, a Chinese immigrant who'd faced his own share of skepticism, came to treat patients and stayed to study Sarah's system. He'd never seen anything like it. He measured the cabin temperature with his mercury thermometer. 67 degrees at floor level, 69 degrees at waist height, 70 degrees near the ceiling, almost perfectly even distribution, no cold corners, no drafts, no smoke, no fire danger. Chen asked Sarah to explain her system while he took notes. She walked him through the principles, the buried pipes, the thermal mass of the earth, the heat exchange process, the salt water preventing freeze. Chen asked about fuel consumption. Sarah showed him her wood supply, barely touched. Chen asked about maintenance. Sarah demonstrated the pump, explaining she spent 20 minutes morning and evening on circulation. Chen did calculations. A typical family burned 3 to 4 cords of wood per month during severe cold. Sarah would use less than half a cord for the entire winter. The fuel savings alone would pay for her pipe and labor within 2 years. But the real value wasn't economic. It was survival. On December 20th, Chen brought Thomas Garrett, Elizabeth Crawford, Samuel Bridger, and Reverend Patterson together in Sarah's cabin for a demonstration. Sarah had agreed to let them see empirical proof. Chen placed thermometers at various points in the cabin. Floor, 68 degrees. Table height, 69 degrees. Near ceiling, 70 degrees. He then went outside and measured. Air temperature, 38 below zero. Wind chill, estimated 55 below. He measured Sarah's wood consumption, 1 small piece burning in her stove, primarily for psychological comfort and cooking. He calculated heat output. The wood provided maybe 5,000 BTUs, yet the cabin maintained nearly 70 degrees in 55 below conditions. Chen measured the saltwater temperature coming from the buried pipes, 46 degrees, temperature leaving the heat exchange box, returning underground, 38 degrees. 8-degree differential captured and distributed. He calculated flow rate based on Sarah's pumping, approximately 3 gallons per minute during active pumping. Over 20 minutes, 60 gallons circulated. The BTU transfer was precisely what Sarah had designed for. Chen showed them the numbers. The system worked exactly as thermal physics predicted. The Earth's constant temperature plus active circulation plus efficient heat exchange equaled comfortable interior warmth with minimal supplemental heat. Thomas Garrett stared at the data and said something that would be remembered in settlement history. I was wrong. This works. Not just works. It's superior to everything we've been doing. Sarah, I mocked you. I called you foolish. I was the fool. Elizabeth Crawford examined the pipes, the pump, the copper coiling. Her frost-bitten hand throbbed, a permanent reminder of the cost of conventional wisdom. I need to know every detail, she said. Materials, measurements, process. I want to build this. Samuel Bridger, the mining engineer who'd proven with mathematics that Sarah's system couldn't function, looked at his calculations again and found his error. He'd assumed passive heat transfer. Sarah had engineered active circulation. The difference was everything. Reverend Patterson, who'd preached that God provided wood and fire for warmth, saw divine wisdom differently now. Perhaps, he said quietly, God also provides the earth's heat and gives us minds to harness it. Sarah, you've saved lives. My mother would be dead. Thomas's son would be dead. How many others? Sarah's response was typical of her character throughout this ordeal. No gloating. No bitterness about the mockery she'd endured. Just practical generosity. I'll share everything, she said. Specifications, measurements, mistakes I made so you don't repeat them. This knowledge isn't mine to keep. It belongs to everyone trying to survive out here. Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard finally broke, Sarah's cabin became a classroom. She showed 17 families exactly how to replicate her system. The pipe layout had to be 6 feet deep below frost line. The grid pattern needed 3-foot spacing to maximize soil contact without pipes stealing heat from each other. The total length depended on cabin size. Her 400 feet heated 900 square feet of living space. Proportionally, larger homes needed more pipe. The salt water needed 18 to 20% concentration to prevent freezing. The hand pump required a leather seal and regular maintenance. The heat exchange box needed copper coiling because copper transferred heat 3 times more efficiently than iron. Families took notes frantically. Where could they get pipe? Sarah had salvaged hers from an abandoned mining operation, but the settlement could order more from Billings. How much did it cost? Approximately $40 for a complete system sized for an average cabin. That was expensive, but a family burned $15 worth of wood per month in severe cold. The system paid for itself in one winter. How long to install? Working steadily, about 3 weeks. But Sarah emphasized, start in summer or early fall. You couldn't dig trenches in frozen ground. If you waited until winter cold to believe the system worked, you'd already missed your window. The winter of 1883-84 claimed 14 lives in the Billings settlement. Hypothermia, pneumonia brought on by prolonged cold exposure, accidents trying to gather fuel in whiteout conditions. Sarah Thornton's family suffered no cold-related illness. Neither did the families who'd taken refuge in her cabin. When spring came and the settlement did its accounting, the numbers were stark. Families with traditional heating had consumed an average of 12 cords of wood. Cost? Approximately $60. Labor? Hundreds of hours of cutting, hauling, splitting, stacking, and constant stoking. Sarah had used 1.5 cords. Cost? $6. Labor, 20 minutes daily of pumping plus minimal stove tending. By May 1884, 23 families had begun digging trenches. Sarah helped each one, checking depths, advising on pipe layout, troubleshooting problems. Thomas Garrett installed his system in June, adding his own innovation. He included a valve system that could isolate sections of pipe for maintenance. Elizabeth Crawford built hers in July, making the heat exchange box larger to serve both her living quarters and the store. Samuel Bridger engineered improvements to the pump design, creating a lever system that required less force. What had started as one widow's desperate innovation became a community transformation. The technology spread beyond Billings. Families in nearby settlements heard stories about the widow who'd heated her home with buried pipes. Some dismissed it as exaggeration, others investigated. By fall 1884, 43 homes in Montana Territory had installed ground source heating systems based on Sarah's design. The variations were fascinating. Some families used clay pipe instead of iron. Others experimented with different heat exchange methods. A homesteader in Helena added a secondary loop that preheated water for washing. A rancher near Great Falls built a massive system with 800 feet of pipe that kept his barn warm enough to prevent livestock deaths. The economic impact rippled through the region. Demand for firewood dropped by approximately 40% among families with ground source systems. This meant less pressure on nearby forests, fewer logging accidents, and reduced labor hours spent on fuel procurement. The money saved on wood got spent on other supplies, stimulating trade at general stores. Elizabeth Crawford's records showed that families with ground source heating spent their extra income on improved food, better clothing, and tools for expanding their homesteads. The technology didn't just keep people warm, it freed resources for prosperity. Critics became advocates. Thomas Garrett wrote to relatives in Wisconsin, describing the system in detail and urging them to install it before winter. Margaret Hayes presented the concept to new arrivals, explaining it with the authority of someone who'd nearly lost her feet to frostbite before seeing the alternative. Samuel Bridger published a technical paper in a Montana mining journal, complete with thermodynamic calculations that proved the system's efficiency. Reverend Patterson preached a sermon titled Humility and Hidden Heat, acknowledging that wisdom could come from unexpected sources and that questioning authority sometimes meant questioning himself. The innovations continued. Sarah herself refined her design based on 3 seasons of operation. She discovered that slightly angled pipes drained more completely during maintenance, preventing corrosion. She found that insulating the above-ground portions of the manifold improved efficiency by 3 to 5%. She developed a simple pressure gauge that indicated when the system needed saltwater replenishment. Each improvement got shared freely with the growing community of ground source heating users. The technology evolved through collective experimentation rather than proprietary secrecy. By 1887, Sarah's system had been documented in territorial records. The Montana Territory Bureau of Statistics included ground source heating in its report on innovative frontier technologies. The Billings settlement became known regionally as the Warm Town because so many homes had adopted the technology. Travelers commented on entering cabins in January and finding them comfortably warm without the smoke, noise, and danger of oversized fires. The settlement's child mortality rate dropped measurably. Respiratory illnesses decreased. Winter was still hard, but it was survivable in ways it hadn't been before. Sarah Thornton died on March 3, 1912, at the age of 61. Her obituary in the Billings Gazette mentioned her late husband Jacob, her 3 children who'd all survived to adulthood, and her contribution to frontier heating technology. Her original cabin still stood, still heated by the same buried pipes she'd installed in September 1883. The iron had lasted. The principle had proven timeless. Her eldest daughter maintained the system and lived in that cabin until 1934, when she donated the property to the Montana Historical Society. The cabin exists today as a preserved site demonstrating 19th century innovation in sustainable heating. Modern geothermal heating systems use the same principle Sarah Thornton engineered by hand in 1883. Ground source heat pumps circulate fluid through buried pipes to extract the Earth's constant temperature. The technology is now recognized by the Department of Energy as one of the most efficient heating and cooling systems available. Contemporary systems use electric pumps instead of hand pumps, and they achieve coefficient of performance ratings of 3 to 5, meaning they move 3 to 5 times more energy than they consume. But the fundamental physics, the recognition that Earth's thermal mass offers free heat waiting to be extracted, that insight belongs to pioneers like Sarah. The near loss of this knowledge is sobering. If the winter of 1883-84 had been milder, if Sarah's system hadn't been tested so dramatically, if critics had convinced her to abandon the project, the principle might have died with her. How much other traditional knowledge has been lost because it looked foolish to experts who never tested it under crisis conditions? How many innovations have been dismissed by people too confident in conventional wisdom to imagine alternatives? Sarah Thornton's story isn't just about heating technology. It's about the courage to trust your own observations over community consensus and the generosity to share knowledge freely even with those who mocked you. Contemporary sustainable building practices have rediscovered what Sarah understood. Passive house design emphasizes earth coupling. Modern homesteaders install ground source heat pumps. Green building advocates promote radiant floor heating. These aren't new ideas. They're old ideas, tested by necessity on the frontier, forgotten during the era of cheap fossil fuels, and now being remembered as we face the necessity of sustainable living again. Sarah Thornton was doing renewable energy engineering in 1883. She just didn't call it that. Give this video a like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me what other historical building techniques you want me to investigate. The comment section is where this community shares knowledge, just like Sarah shared her system with her neighbors. Next time, we're diving into the Swedish immigrant who built a stone root cellar in Wisconsin that kept vegetables fresh for 18 months without ice, defeating every food preservation expert in the county.